Welcome back, everyone. My name is John Uhler. This is Journey to Healing, and we are looking at toxic relationships. Really, we're looking at the issue of boundaries and what sets up a relationship to be susceptible to becoming not just unhealthy, moving beyond unreasonable to unhealthy and then toxic and beyond. Ultimately, it comes down to my ability to discern the nature of another person and to understand that I have the right to have boundaries. But if I was typecast into early on, if I was geared, as it were, toward questioning myself, meaning doubting my intuition, then I will have a very difficult time being able to adequately discern the kind of person I'm dealing with. And when you're dealing with professional grade pigs, and that's not name calling, that comes out of Matthew chapter 7, verse 6. We need to know, because it will be very predictable. If we have somebody in our life that we've been told not to deal with, and we go ahead and deal with them, then we're going to be the ones to reap the consequences. You can't control anybody else, but if you allow someone in your life that there are enough red flag warning signs, the outcome is predictable. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, Jesus warns us we need to be able to discern somebody who he calls a pig, and that's to a Jewish audience, so that's pretty profound. We've also, in the past, talked out of the book of Proverbs. That's 3,000 years ago. Chapters 26, 27, and 28 will reference who we should or shouldn't be around as far as fools. Same concept, same idea. I would recommend, to be able to have the context for what we're going to talk about next, meaning now, I recommend visiting SurvivorSupport.net under podcast, and that will allow you to bring yourself up to date to have the context, because we are looking at not just toxic relationships, but even beyond that, and what happens. So as review, we ended the previous week, as it were, with this, with a slide looking at somebody that has begun to progress downward. You look at the little guy on the right, and he has no knapsacks because he is not accepting his responsibility to do what is right, just, and fair. He has begun to give his responsibility more and more over to the person on the left. The little person on the left, if you look, they're going to have a green knapsack. The person on the right has a blue. So this is over time. A toxic relationship just doesn't happen immediately. It happens over time. And again, to review what a toxic relationship is, it's where the other person actively uses you to carry their load and strategically intends to ensure the relationship remains that way. That is why they are not going to change without being incentivized, meaning you're going to have to make the change. The other person has mastered the art of ensuring that you accept and take their stuff, their responsibility. The other person works to ensure things remain as they are, and the other person will make it painful. They're going to punish you. They're going to make it painful for you to make changes. If this person on the right continues to go downward, and how would they do that? First and foremost, by violating their conscience. Their conscience, the moment they get into the negative category, their conscience kicks in. Why? To get them up to the positive. The positive level, meaning where they are going to accept their responsibility, which would then look like that. So a reasonable relationship is one where each person carries their own load. But as you start to have somebody become selfish, so an unreasonable relationship, they're going to dump, then it continues. You have an unhealthy relationship and eventually a toxic relationship. What is that like to be around someone? You will have someone at a very different level than you are. Let me remove my picture here. And this is the makings for a love-hate relationship. And the question is this: as we head into the holidays, where are the people at that you're going to be sitting with around the Thanksgiving table or around Christmas? Are they at the same level you are in terms of being responsible, doing what is right, just, and fair, or Are they selfish? And if they're selfish, why are you going to be around them? And if you're going to be around them, why do you expect them to be anything other than what they are and do and act in any other way than they have in the past? You have unrealistic expectations, and that is a recipe for disaster. And that's why we end up finding so many people with drug and alcohol issues or compulsive eating during the holidays. It's not because you just love to eat. It's because you're probably around people that are very, very frustrating. Here's another chart that we looked at last time, which is as someone starts to go downhill, there's a progressive pull. Downward, it's like getting close to a waterfall. So right here in this picture, we have a healthy relationship, but if the person on the right starts giving the person on the left their responsibility and taking them for granted, you can see there's a progression. They will begin to take and use. This relationship will start to become very draining. It'll become very discouraging. This person will be the person on the right who will end up looking like, again, on the way downward, this is what he's going to look like. It's you doing all the giving and he's doing all the taking. It's you putting up with all the frustrations. Look at the character qualities, as a matter of fact, over on the far right. Instead of that person being faithful, they will actually betray your confidence. And how many times have people experienced that? That you share something in confidence, and before you know it, it's spread all over the family, it's spread all over the neighborhood, all over the church, so that people can pray more intelligently, right? We call that gossip, and then we call it slander. Instead of being thoughtful, they end up being self-centered. I'm reading from right to left. You can see the vertical lines there. This is what happens in terms of character. Somebody that progresses properly, they become more sacrificial. I'll actually read left to right. Sacrificial, truthful, kind, trustworthy, thoughtful, and faithful. And we could add a whole lot more. We could add the scout description of a Boy Scout, right? Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind. Those are all up at the top. But the more someone goes downhill in terms of their character, look at what happens. Instead of being sacrificial, they become increasingly selfish. They become a liar and comfortable with deception and lying. They become hurtful. They become deceptive, lying and deceptive, kind of the same thing in a way. They become self-centered, and they have no problems betraying. So as someone starts to, if the person on the right starts to become that way, the question is, what should the person on the left do? Well, the person on the left is going to have to be willing to look at reality and look at what happens. And what is going on? Well, the best place to look to get a description of what the truth is about the person that begins to go downhill, and they will progress. So I'm going to bring up the other chart here, if I can bring that up. So someone who has become accustomed to, person on the right, dumping, taking their responsibility, putting it on someone else, they will end up with a twisted character where everything that used to be right, wrong, good and bad becomes inverted. Instead of loving people and using things, they will invert things. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 19 and 20, Paul talked to the Corinthians via his letter and tried to help them understand that there's a limit beyond which we should deal with people or not deal with people. And he used the term fool because, coming from a Hebrew mindset, that is not the modern, what we think of fool. When we hear that word, we typically don't understand how profound that word was 2,000 years ago or even 3,000 years ago. To become a fool was, in modern rendering psychological terms, a psychopath, a white-collar psychopath. The difference between a bloody psychopath, and that's what we tend to think of when we hear the word psychopath, we think of Alfred Hitchcock's movie, right? But there's a difference. That kind of psychopath, of course, sheds blood. He's very impulsive, and he will have a limited body count, and I'm not making light of that. Okay? But somebody who's a white-collar psychopath gets into politics, they get into finances. Bernie Madoff, according to James Fallon, Robert Hare, His example of the classic white-collar psychopath is Bernie Madoff, who was head of the NASDAQ, made off with everybody's money. James Fallon references Bill Clinton. I also reference Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. That is not a political statement. That is a statement of forensic assessment in terms of psychopathy. Okay, the nature of psychopathy really is a reprobate mind. It's one and the same, which is another term for a fool. And when somebody starts to morph into a pig, they are ending up with a reprobate mind, meaning they are now becoming psychopathic in their mind. And we looked at a couple weeks ago, what does the mind of a psychopath look like? What happens if you end up with somebody like this? Can you spot them? The more profoundly reprobate somebody is, the less you're going to be able to spot them out of a crowd. They actually know how to blend in. They actually look increasingly normal. So if you don't have your intuition, and if you can't discern, and if you can't see the red flags, the warning flags, then you're going to be a sitting duck. Especially if you come out of a family where you were the one, or you were told, you were one of those kids that were told that you had to be nice, God wants you nice, that it's all about pleasing people, making everybody happy. Well, now you're a sitting duck because that becomes second nature to you, and people have taken advantage of you over the years. And predators, pigs, dogs, fools, perpetrators, all the same, they know how to spot your kind, our kind, a mile away. And so Paul is speaking to this because he knows that perpetrators and predators and fools and pigs and dogs and every other selfish creature, they love going to church. Why? Because there are people that think that it's godly to be nice. And so they're going to worm their way in. 2 Peter chapter 2 talks about that. So we have to have discernment. But Paul is trying to help the Corinthians realize they are dealing with pigs and they shouldn't. Let me read for you what he says. He says, you know what? I should be more spiritual. You guys are really spiritual, but I can't bring myself to tolerate fools. You put up with fools. You actually enjoy it. And he says this, you put up with it when someone enslaves you. This is out of the New Living Translation, which is different than the New World Translation. That's a cult version, but the New Living Translation is a very good translation. So he says this in verse 20, you put up with it when someone enslaves you, takes everything you have, takes advantage of you, takes control of everything, and then slaps you in the face. Paul says, I'm ashamed to say that we were too weak to do that. Okay, he's being sarcastic. He's saying, why in the world are you putting up with that? So we're going to use that as an understanding, or to help us understand what is the makings, or what are the red flags that tell us that we are dealing with an unhealthy, a toxic person, someone who is profoundly selfish, if not a fool. Well, the first thing he says is that, and I'm going to call this the stages. Okay, he says you allow someone, you're around someone that begins to control you, begins to assume, and in the red, these are all the different meanings of the Greek word. So the fool will begin to assume control over you, mentally and emotionally enslave you through presumption and emotional manipulation. He moves in and makes himself at home. That's stage one. Stage two is going to look like this. I'm going to get my picture out of the way. Okay, stage two. Now again, they advance in stair-step-like fashion downward. Each of these stages represent another knapsack they're putting on you. They take advantage of you. They prey upon you, take everything you have, and devour your substance. He starts helping himself, and this could also be female. This is not gender specific, but they start helping themselves to everything you have, everything you own, everything you're bringing home in terms of income. And the person is now turning the tables on you, where you start to almost feel like it's their home. Okay? So they've changed the nature of it. If you settle for that, that's another knapsack, they will take it to the next level. Now they're going to deceive you. So they're getting in there, they're establishing themselves, and meanwhile you're having to turn your intuition down. And so they are already without a conscience, probably. And so now because they don't have a conscience, they're going to get you to deaden your intuition or turn your intuition down. There I am. Okay, so the third stage, it's then going to transition downward inevitably. They're going to deceive you. They're going to take full advantage of you to get the better of you by deceit and to catch you in a net or in a trap, meaning you will feel obligated and responsible because they'll hold you to your word. They will use your ethics and morals against you. He strategically has the person tied up in emotional knots, questioning themselves and making the other person feel that they are the problem. This is accomplished by means of disengaging the intuition. Thus, there is little means of reality testing. They have now isolated the victim and now causes them to not only doubt themselves, but to give credence to the words of the manipulator or the abuser. Things are happening within the heart of hearts of the victim, quite frankly. They are now being used and abused. Let me find the fourth stage here. Do we have? Yes. And again, more knapsacks are being dumped. Stage 4. They take control of everything, puts on airs, and arrogant. This is the thing about the psychopath. They know how to do the big lie. They come across in such a way that they look and act absolutely convincing. They will say big whopping lies and look at you. Because the thing that they know is you have a conscience, you have morals and ethics, and you are bound by that because of your own conscience. But they have dispensed themselves of conscience, and so now they are free to say big whoppers, and they're not obligated to explain if you finally catch them. As a matter of fact, we have right now going on in Arizona, right? People have been caught cheating in the election. It's pretty clear. So you're going to see psychopaths say, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. And then they'll keep doing the dance. They'll hop all over the place. One of the things, a telltale sign that you're dealing with a profoundly adept, professional-grade manipulator, pig, fool, dog, pig, and white-collar psychopath is this. They will be able to jump from subject to subject faster than you can keep up in order to tie you in emotional knots. That is the art of the dance. So they take control of everything now. So they've wiggled their way in. They begin to take control. Now they've pretty much got you. They've taken control of everything. They put on airs. They act arrogantly. They now own you, and you are simply a guest in your own home or your own life because they allow it. Everything has been surrendered to them by you, including the isolation from and separation from family and friends. That's exactly what cult leaders do as well. Okay, and you've surrendered your mind, body, spirit, future plans, who you're going to marry, mental stability, and spiritual status, even with God, meaning they'll tell you where you are with God. And so you'll end up looking to them, or they'll tell you if you're right with God or not. And they are now convinced, and here's the key, they are convinced you'll never catch on, and they deem you too stupid to figure it out. That's why they're playing you for fools or for a fool. And then eventually, if you continue in that kind of relationship, it'll end up, the words are getting smaller. Now they can't help themselves. Now they will make sport of you. You will become their entertainment. So they will slap you in the face. They'll strike you in the face, both literally, figuratively, and or literally. They now use you for sport and increase their disdain for you. Since you have no willingness to stand up for yourself, they now derive a sense of sadistic sense of satisfaction, humiliating you, at watching you squirm, at controlling you and your life, at watching you give up everything for them, as the pig and the predator love seeing the effect they have upon you and knowing that you're getting weaker, more vulnerable, that you're good and pure and trusting, and so they're going to end up using that against you. In other words, you are simply entertainment and sport for them. You are a means to an end and nothing more. And they will easily discard you if you no longer serve your purpose, if you give pushback, or if you actually find your voice. That is the kind of person we're dealing with. You can give and give and give, and you will be harming yourself. You have to be able to see who you're dealing with. Here is another chart. I'm going to remove my picture for a moment, and I want you to see what happens. We have our little guy here. He's now descended below descended below 1. Over on the top right, what you have is what we should be doing in order to discern the truth about someone so that we don't go downhill with them, meaning so they don't use us and abuse us and dump. Okay, so as someone is starting to get worse, if someone is showing character issues, we first need to bring it up. We speak the truth in love. The second is now it's transitioning to about -2 level. This is no longer just an accidental flaw. This is becoming more entrenched. This is now a part of their character. How do we know? Because we've been addressing it, and they've been resistant. So now we have to have a little more forthright type of discussions, and we may be implementing some boundaries already. Then eventually, since the positive did not motivate them, now we have to move to the negative. We are to spur one another on to love and good works. That is a negative form of negative motivation. Ask a horse that gets spurred. And eventually we are to correct and admonish. That's an old-fashioned term saying we need to have a straightforward conversation. And if at that point, and you can see the number, they're at -3. If at that point the person continues, then they now meet the criteria for a pig. And Jesus said what? Do not cast your pearls before swine. It is not spiritual to keep hanging in there with this person. Now what will happen is this. If you continue to descend, you're just going to get in the mud with the pig, and you will always lose because they will trample your pearls and then they will turn on you. Over on the right are those stages that Paul talked about as far as what a fool will do. He will up the ante as he's getting worse. He goes through that twisted zone. So you look on the right, he goes from manipulating to using to deceiving to gaslighting to controlling to overt abuse. What happens as that person is morphing into a bigger and bigger pig? They are passing through the point of unlikely return. And that's where you need to dust your sandals off before you get in the mud. You need to begin to move on. And this is where people resist. This is rewriting Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, where Jesus says, or the Lord says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your path. But if you take matters into your own hands, then you're not going to dust your sandals off. You're going to get in the mud. You are going to begin to work in an unhealthy way, absolving that person of responsibility and rescuing it and enabling, and all you'll do is give the pig a greater leash and more room to be hurtful. And you become a co-facilitator of a pig hurting people. Okay. He then transitions from unlikely, the return being very unlikely, meaning return back to his senses, back to conscience, to the point of no interest in ever returning. He's losing the want to, and the point of only wanting more of it. That's what's happening when he's becoming twisted. The reason he's not going to turn around is he not only is not sorry, but he's actually liking it this way, and he reaches a point about -6. If you don't like this, you can come up with your own scale, by the way. But after working in the Department of Corrections on the psych staff for about 11 years, is kind of what I came up with. This is just a brief version of it. Eventually point of viewing others with morals and ethics as chumps. He continues to descend to the point of viewing others, to the point of being driven to make an impression and leave a mark. Now he's becoming hurtful. That's what's driving him. To the point of being driven to defile, and that should have a lot of sexual connotations, meaning that should ring a bell. And eventually get to a point of being driven by the thrill of the game and by having the last word, last say, and last laugh. That is the working definition of a psychopath. No conscience, no remorse, and no empathy. The skill of the sophisticated white-collar psychopath or pig or fool or dog, whether cloaked as clergy, as a politician, a power broker, lover, confidant, or as a man pushing the contrived gender narrative or minor attracted persons myth, lies in his artful ability to gather sufficient data about you, about how you operate, about your values, your guiding principles, and your boundaries in order to use those to his strategic advantage and to your detriment. Jesus knew what he was talking about when he said, "Do not get in the pig pen." We will continue to look at what drives someone, and we will look more at the nature of what are these pigs like? What is it like when someone morphs, and why don't you want to be in the pig pen with them? Because the outcome will be predictable. So we will look more in depth into really white-collar psychopaths next time on Journey to Healing.
You've been listening to Journey to Healing, sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. We trust you've been helped by the information our host, Jon Uhler, has shared. To donate to this ministry, schedule a personal consultation with Jon, or to arrange a professional training for your church or organization with Jon, simply visit our website. On behalf of Survivor Support, we look forward to hearing from you and to have you join us next time on Journey to Healing.